Hi, this video will discuss marginal productivity, average productivity, and diminishing marginal product. So let's first determine the marginal productivity. The marginal productivity, so what I've done is I've added one worker at a time, and they have made this good. This rings is our output. And here are the corresponding number of rings made when this number of workers are hired. So we want to find the marginal productivity of that first worker. To determine this marginal productivity, this is going to be your change in your output. Your rings went up by 4, divided by your change in workers. It went from 0 to 1. That's a change of 1. So your marginal productivity for this first one will be 4. To find your average productivity, simply divide your rings by your workers. So the average product of workers, or labor, is also 4. And no, we do not have diminishing marginal productivity for this first worker because it was undefined. We had no workers. Now, when we hire our second worker, what's the marginal product of labor now for the second worker? Well, the question can be answered by looking at how the number of rings changed when you had one worker, which produced 4 rings, and 2 workers, which produced 7. This is an additional output of 3 rings. So that's our marginal productivity of labor when you have the second worker is 3. What's the average productivity of labor? Simply divide your rings, 7 divided by your workers, 2. That's going to be 3.5. So note the average exceeds the marginal. Is there diminishing marginal productivity? Well, has marginal productivity fallen from the previous number? Yes, it was 4, now it's 3. So yes, there is diminishing marginal productivity. And once it falls, it typically continues falling. So this wants to know, hey, is it falling? Yes, it is. What about when you have 3 workers? What's the marginal productivity then of that third worker? Well, how did your output change when you have that third worker hired? Well, before you had 7 rings, now you have 8, so you have 1 more ring. What about the average productivity now? The average productivity is your rings, 8, divided by your workers, 3. So this is going to be 8/3. That's your average productivity, a little under 3. Is marginal product diminishing? Well, it was 3, now it's 1, so yes, it is diminishing. Finally, we have 4 workers making 8 rings. What's the marginal productivity when that 4th worker is hired? Well, this is actually 0. You didn't get any more rings when that worker was hired. What's our average productivity now? 8 divided by 4 is 2. Is it diminishing? Yes, it is. And how about when you have 5 workers? Well, now your rings are 6. So that is actually a negative marginal productivity. A firm would never hire workers if they brought them negative marginal productivity. In fact, one step further, a firm would never hire a worker if the marginal productivity was 0. So what's the average productivity? Well, this is your ring, 6, divided by your number of workers, divided by 5. Yes, marginal productivity continues to diminish. So this is a summary of, given your workers and your output, how you can find marginal product of labor, average product of labor, and whether it's diminishing your marginal product of labor is. This exercise was easier to calculate given our workers are changing by 1 each time. If workers change by a number other than 1, this can make it a little more challenging, calculating the change in output divided by your change in input for marginal product of labor, for example.